Derek Wilson, and the title of my research paper was How Bias Hinders Advancement. We were tasked with comparing values to our major, and as a biology major, some of the values I consider most important to the field of biology is research, education, and advancement. And I wanted to focus specifically on the research side of that and how funding is allocated and how they decide how to distribute the money to all these research programs and projects. Scientific research and advancement are fueled by funding from nonprofit organizations, private companies, and government grants. How these funds are allocated is determined by a scientific peer review process and ranked in order to determine the research with the highest probability of success and positive results. This system is flawed due to personal bias of the reviewers. Bias has affected scientific advancement in research and has hurt many research projects throughout the past century. A new revised system such as a lottery system would help distribute funds without regard to age, gender, or race. So first I'll begin to explain how the peer review process is. First, a research team applies for a grant, and that they apply to either a private company or a public program such as the National Institute of Health, which is the major source of funding for biomedical research in the United States. And for the National Institute of Health, they then form a panel of peer reviewers in order to grade the program, and they give it a score that is then combined and compared to all the other research groups that applied for the grant, and then they're put into a ranking in order to determine how much money each group gets and if they get any money at all. Part of the bias to these programs is through diverse groups have been found to receive less funding and have lower chances of receiving funding, even though studies have found that a diverse research group has higher chances of success due to having a variety of people with a variety of knowledge from different fields and different opinions in order to come together better and have more ideas in order to advance their research further. Critics have argued that diversity is penalized in the evaluation and award process because diverse teams are more difficult to evaluate and because proposals from diverse teams are perceived as being less safe or less doable. Because of having differently minded people with different backgrounds, the peer reviewers believe that they would not be able to come together and build off of each other as effectively as a research team full of people all from the same background. A greater diversity of knowledge is a benefit and should be a positive when analyzing a potential research to fund. Diverse teams have been linked to high impact research that has been very successful. Throughout the past, the program surrounding research funding's attention has diminished with the continued concern surrounding reliability of scientific research and literature. For example, people believing whether or not the effectiveness of vaccines, the impact of humans on climate change, theory of evolution, and even the moon landing. From the research funding problem has not really gotten any better in the past few decades. From 2003 to 2015, the National Institute of Health's budget did not increase, meaning that the budget actually decreased due to inflation. Finally, in 2016, the budget was increased. So the funding for the National Institute of Health goes both to groups inside the National Institute of Health and outside. But groups outside receive 10 times the amount of funding as groups inside. Groups on the outside are reviewed by a panel of peers, and this process hasn't changed in the past 50 years. And then although the process hasn't changed in the last 50 years. When the program was first created and designed, 50% of research received funding, and now in some institutions only 10% of research teams that apply for grants receive funding. A study found that the predictive ability of peer review was scarcely superior to what would be achieved by random chance, and that difference is negligible. The study process is not very precise. In some panels, only 2 to 3 reviewers on the panel carefully read the grant application. This shows that not all reviewers necessarily care or give it full effort towards it, and don't really have in-depth knowledge on the research program, which means they really can't decide how effective or the probability of success of that research application. One study concluded that 59% of funded grants could miss funding simply on the basis of a random variability in scoring. Due to the limited amount of funding now, one bad score from a researcher is enough to deny them the chance of getting any funding. And recent rules have only allowed research groups to apply twice to the National Institute of Health, and they'd have to wait for 37 months before they could resubmit. 3 years with no funding is a long enough time to kill a project without having any chance of reviving their research program. Even with this, these panels can be heavily biased. Some studies have found that researchers tend to be biased towards other scientists that they have relation with, have worked with in the past, or friends with. And studies have found that approximately 25% of funding decisions are biased by the reviewer. This can be very harmful considering the amount of breakthroughs being found in research that was targeted at an entirely different field. So these reviewers could be caring more about their field over another, and if they were to exclude this possibly very successful research, even though it was focused on one thing, it could have a breakthrough in a very different field. This process that was designed in order to help distribute funds evenly and fairly has not done so at all, and has failed some of the values of what's important to the field of biology, and hoping for advancement of greater understanding of many areas in science. A lottery system would be a great way to fix that by still having a review process, but it could be weighted in a way that the review process did not have as strong as effect, and it could only be used in order to weed out research that had very little chances of success. Because the study found that the review process, research that had been picked through the review process, had just as much of a chance of succeeding as if they did just through randomly choosing. A diversity in a research team can make research more successful, but can also hinder chances of research funding, which hurts research if having a wider variety of viewpoints can hurt you. Research is the first big step of every scientific advancement, and proper funding can make or break that research. If I were to do further research, I would look into how research funds were allocated in the past and how that has evolved.